Okay, friends, it's 6 o'clock, so I'm going to start. First of all, just so everyone knows, I'm going to be muting everybody. If you're not muted already, I'm going to be muting you. At the very bottom of your screen, there should be, if you move your mouse around, you'll see a little chat button. Yeah, there's Kathy on the chat right now. Just pose your question there. Any question, anytime, and I'll answer all the questions at the end. I do want to show you one of the websites, Heritage Quest, which is owned by Ancestry, where I really found quite a few city directories going back to the early 1800s, which was, I could just play around all night long looking at those old city directories. Not necessarily that I have any relatives in there, but just to see the information. I was so impressed with the amount of information that I found on those old city directories, because you just don't think that someone would be publishing a city directory with hundreds of pages in the early 1800s, and yet they did. Anyway, I want to do a little demonstration because Heritage Quest is available from almost any library with your library card. You usually have to log in with your library card. So, and if you're having problems, I can certainly help you. So, oh, thank you, Kathy. She said just this week, FamilySearch.org has added business directories. Yeah, thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to mute everybody. And if you have a question, don't hesitate to ask. Okay, so let me share my screen and we will start. Okay. So tonight I'm going to be talking about using city directories in your genealogical research. I would hope that some people have already been using city directories. You can find out so much information, but when and where did they start, and who initiated it? Well, I don't know if you've ever heard of Captain John McPherson. He was born in 1726 and he died in 1792. He was a privateer for the British during the 7 Years' War. And for his services, unfortunately, he lost an arm, but he gained a fortune, which he used to build a mansion which is still standing in Philadelphia today. It's called Mount Pleasant. Okay, during the Revolutionary War, he served with our patriots. And after the war, he spent the rest of his life involved in a number of very prosperous projects. And one of them was publishing the very first city directory. And he published it for the city of Philadelphia, PA. And how he started by numbering the houses, and then he published the directory of the names of the people who lived in those houses. And he was actually encouraged to undertake this project by the people. They wanted to know who their neighbors were and the businesses in the community. And he charged for numbering each house and furnishing the city. It was as low as half a dollar, 50 cents. However, he announced that the directory would be at least 3 times as large as he thought, and his expense was 4 times as much. But his city directory initiated future directories because he arranged it alphabetically, and it contained, the very first one contained about 6,400 entries, all arranged by surname. It also included the street address, and when available, because not every house had a number, if the number was there, he included it. It was also included the street directory showing the number of the houses that were empty or inhabited by people who wouldn't give their names. And that's common even to this day, people who don't want to give up their information. By the turn of the century, printers and publishers like David Longworth and John Doggett would start to produce city directories as well. So 1785, the very first publication of a city directory. Okay. And then in 1830, this is just an example. Here's the 1830 New York City Directory. And the New York City directories were published between, as you can see, 1786 and 1934. The first telephone books began to appear in the late 1870s. Both forms of the directory are interesting for a number of reasons, not at least like a census, because you can tie or find relatives or people that you're searching for in a city directory that may be missed on a census, or they may have moved around. So it's really interesting to, if you have an idea where someone lived, to always search those particular cities and for their city directories. Historical city directories are even more useful because what happened, they were earlier than telephone directories. They're more inclusive. You don't need a telephone to be in a city directory. Okay. So this is just the annual register for 1830 for the city of New York City. The history of city directories. Obviously, they're the predecessors to the modern day telephone directory, which really, how many people even get a telephone directory anymore? Not very many. How many people have a cell phone, and cell phones aren't put in a directory? Many city directories were published annually in print format and focused on the accurate spelling of names. That's really important, the accurate spelling of names. Unfortunately, they didn't always include people living in rural areas or those who lived in small towns. So sometimes those city directories may be difficult to find, or they just simply do not exist. The head of the household or those who were regularly employed were listed. City directory publishers were attempting to provide the details required to communicate with others in the city. And for salesmen wanted to find out where people lived, and they wanted to promote their own businesses. Many directories list organizations instead of individuals and are sometimes called registers, catalogs, annuals, yearbooks, or guides, which most of us know. So why do you want to use a city directory? Well, it includes more than just surnames. Many people, when they're looking at a city directory, they instantly go to the names. They forget about the very beginning. They forget about the end. You want to make sure that you're looking at the beginning because they have abbreviations. Obviously, a city directory has to use, keep in mind, it costs so much money for every character that the publishers were putting in a city directory. So they had to come up with a system that would help alleviate some of that cost, so they used abbreviations. But if you don't know what those abbreviations stand for, you may misinterpret their meaning. And as I talked about earlier, information can fill in the blanks between federal census schedules. They're helpful for research in large cities where a large number of the population were renters, new arrivals, or temporary residents. Immigrants moved frequently, or once they got to their destination, but they may have immigrated from across the pond, and they may have landed in New York, they may have landed in Baltimore, and they may have been in New Jersey for a while. So they may have been on a city directory there, but their destination may have been Colorado, it may have been Chicago, it may have been Wisconsin, it may have been California. So you may want to find out where they landed and then check those city directories to see if maybe your ancestors are listed there. We may find other family members on a city directory. You may not, but you may. You could discover an ancestor's death. For instance, a woman may be listed as a widow, which is WID. But however, let me just add, there's a chance that women, because of the stigmatism attached to being divorced, may have actually listed themselves as a widow instead of being a divorced woman. So when you see widow, she may be a widow, but she may actually be just divorced. You might learn an ancestor's occupation and even their employer. Many city directories, many include maps, schools, businesses, churches, cemeteries, and of course, lots and lots of occupations. Keep in mind that the telephone was invented in 1876, and at that time, only 3 people had telephones. So those city directories are extremely important for searching for your ancestors. Okay. And here's the anatomy of a city directory. As I was talking about, there's several sections. Most people just go to the names, but I really can't stress enough how you should really start at the beginning if you can. And the beginning usually has an introductory section. It might include population figures, the major industries in the city, maps, and it has a table of contents. It could include the professionals not only in a specific city, but in nearby cities as well. It could include the politicians' names and addresses. I found churches, cemeteries, train stations. In fact, when I was searching for a church in Chicago in 1885, I went to the Newberry, and they never heard of the church. It was a evangelical church. They never heard of the church. I went to the 1880 census. I didn't find it there. So when I went to the city directory, I found it and I found the address. Unfortunately, the church it was here and gone within a few years. But I did find the reverend, the minister, the pastor of the church, and I was able to follow him through census records to see maybe if I could find out any other information. So when I say churches, really, that might be the only place that you'll find the listing for a particular church is in a city directory. And this is an example of the 1875 Chicago City Directory, the front pages, and you'll see laws and ordinances for the city of Chicago and the table of professions, employment, etc. And those are just 2 pages of many pages. Abbreviations, as I referred to earlier, each letter in the directory took ink and paper, so they needed to reduce the listing length and the cost. So you will find not only common abbreviations such as church, which is CH, but you might find abbreviations for various occupations and city streets, directions, religious denominations. So it's important to know what these abbreviations are so you can interpret that information correctly. For instance, I mean, if you can see my little cursor, which I wish I could make it a different color, and I probably could, but not now because I don't know how. Here you can see blacksmith. That would be pretty easy to understand. PLK Smith. Well, you could kind of figure out that blacksmith. BET between. ES east side. Okay. INS insurance. W, uppercase W or a lowercase w means west. And there's widow, WID for widow. WKS works. And unfortunately, each city each city directory didn't use the same abbreviations. So one abbreviation at, like for instance, the city of Chicago could be a different meaning in New York City. So you really have to look at the abbreviations in the beginning of each city directory to interpret it correctly. I had relatives, excuse me, I had relatives that lived in Allen County, Indiana, um, in Fort Wayne, and I was just threw it in there to see what I could find. Again, there's the abbreviations: Fort Wayne City Directory, 1867. And here's one of my like my third great grandfather, Walter Drew, and here's all these abbreviations: HSWCOR. And so it's what that stands for. Oh dear, pardon me, sorry. What that stands for is H is house, S equals south, W equals west, and C equals corner. So you know that Drew and his family live in a house on the southwest corner of Butler and Harrison in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So what could you do with this information? You don't really have a number, but you certainly have the location, and there very well could be property records associated with that address. So it's just like a starting point. You might be able to get more information. And keep in mind that our ancestors more often were more mobile than we might think. They might not show up in an area's city directories for several years after they've moved there. So it's just food for thought, food for thought. Streets and maps. And obviously here in Chicago, everyone knows that the city of Chicago changed street names. So you know, if Chicago did it, other communities could have done it as well. So for instance, in 1909, Chicago began the task of renumbering and renaming streets and addresses. So in order to locate your ancestors with the correct street and address in Chicago, you would first need to do diligent research by using street directories inside the city directory. And some city directories may include maps, and then street directories usually can give you cross streets. But don't be afraid to check for changes in addresses and even town names for the ancestor you might be searching. Town people think that the town was always named one name, and that is absolutely not true. Town names have definitely changed over time. And for those of you interested, there are several websites that could certainly help you with these street changes in Chicago. If you need help with those websites, let me know, because I can give you some help. So here's Brooklyn, New York in 1877. And again, here's abbreviations. But notice, if you read all the blah, blah, blah at the top, if you'll notice that they have Adams Street here, okay, and they tell you where Adams is located. And on the left side of the street, on the left side of the street, the addresses are the odd number, and on the right-hand side of the street, they're even number. And of course, and so they talk about Adams and then Adelphi, the same thing on the left-hand side of the street and on the right-hand side of the street, which could be a little confusing for some people, but they're pointing it out. They're making you aware of how that they have created the street names and addresses in this city directory. Again, here's the Chicago Street and Avenue Guide for 1923. And you say, oh dear, look at all these. First of all the abbreviations. Cal is for Calumet, J is for Jefferson, NE, pretty simple, northeast. P is for Pullman, RY is for railway, RR is for railroad, okay? RP is for Rogers Park. So if you're looking for a particular address, bear in mind to look for these abbreviations and make sure you go to the beginning where it gives you a listing of the streets and the avenue guides. So far, I haven't found any city directories that did not include that information. And I've looked at lots and lots of city directories since I first started creating this program back last fall. So don't forget about Uncle Homer. Of course, you're going to be looking for your ancestor in the city directory, but take the time to look for other family members as well. You might want to use a research log, a chart, for all the relatives that you might believe lived in Valparaiso in 1900, Valparaiso, Indiana. And you're not sure if your ancestors lived in Valparaiso, but you know that they lived in Indiana. Well, I would create a little chart. I'd use a little research form, genealogy form, list all those ancestors, and then search, because you might run across some relatives that you're not even thinking lived in that particular area or were included in that city directory. Okay? So take the time to look for other family members as well. Some city directories list adult children who may be employed and are still living with their parents, or they might be attending school. Look for persons with the same surname residing at the same address. But even look for people whose names are different, because many times families live very near to each other or across town. Especially immigrants. If studied and interpreted correctly, annual directories can tell you where children belong to which household, when they married and started families of their own, and when they established themselves in businesses. That can be a little difficult to interpret. But if you try to follow the family year by year and note the changes, especially in addresses and occupations, you might be a little bit more successful. And immigrants shared more than their ethnicity and culture. They may have shared a familial relationship, common language, faith, and occupation. My German ancestors that immigrated in 1880, the women immigrated. 3 came over. One of my great grandmother's daughter had already lived here. She married shortly after the Chicago fire. She came over and married a Swedish man, a Swiss man. Pardon me. He was from Switzerland. I found them. I could not find where they came initially until I found them on a city directory, and then having found them on a city directory, I went back and kept looking through immigration, and I finally found them. But the best part was, as I kept looking, their last name was Summer. I've talked about him many times. I looked at the name Summer, Somer, Sommer, Sommers, Summers, and of course, Summer, Summer. The best part was, obviously, Chicago wasn't as huge as it is now. I was able to locate all of those family members in a city directory, even the females. Oh, let me get Donna in here. Church records can also be valuable as for discovering dates, places, and family relationships. As I indicated earlier about the evangelical church that I couldn't find, and then I found it on a city directory. Churches may be the only place to find a marriage, a birth, or a death record. Keep in mind, most states weren't required to keep those records until the very early 20th century. So try using the directories to find the church nearest the home of your ancestor that they may have attended based on their religious or ethnic background. You might find a religious record with the name of the clerk listed on the document. Research that person in the city directory as well. That's how I found, I was able to trace the minister from the evangelical church who married my great-great-grandparents. Sometimes the church is closed, but maybe the pastor kept the records from the church. So you might be able to follow his or her whereabouts using census records and then those city directories. Kathy O'Leary was very instrumental in helping me locate a church, a Catholic church for Polish ancestors. We had to go by churches, by city wards, by the addresses for the 1900 census, because years ago, I swear I found my one Polish family, the Wojniaks, on the 1900 census here in Chicago. And unfortunately, years ago, I did not print it, or if I did, I misplaced it because I didn't put it away right away. And I have been completely unsuccessful. And trust me, there are hundreds, thousands of names to go through on those 1900 and 1910 city wards, and then trying to find Catholic churches, and then going by addresses through city directories and census records. So city directories are very instrumental for finding names and churches Businesses, most city directories for major cities also had a special section for business listings. And of course, advertisements, because keep in mind, salesmen wanted people to use those city directories. That was their bread and butter. They wanted advertisements, and they wanted people to find them and use them. So sometimes these two business and advertisements could be in separate sections of the directory or together. But don't eliminate the possibility of your ancestor being listed by his occupation in the business section. Okay, they may have marketed their services. If they did, for instance, here you'll notice that Ball Charles, 4524 Cottage Grove, and Ball Katharina, 4524 Cottage Grove Avenue, are listed under nurses. That's from the 1892 Chicago City Directory. It's in the business section, and those are my my second great grandfather and his wife, my second great grandmother. Both were nurses. They immigrated from Germany, where my great great grandmother, Katharina, was supposedly a surgeon. And unfortunately, when she came over, she was only able to find work as a nurse. But she was very instrumental in working with Michael Reese Hospital well, over 100 years ago. So I found them. I didn't find Charles and I didn't find Katharina in the regular section of the city directory under their name Ball. But look, I did find them under occupations. So if you have an idea of what occupation your relative pursued, it's definitely worthwhile to search through the business section. Chicago City Directories. And I know it seems like I'm focusing a lot on Chicago. Many of us are from Cook County, so that's why there's a little more focus on Chicago. However, there are other directories that I'm going to be talking about as well. So in order to be listed in the Chicago City Directories, your relatives had to live or work in the city of Chicago. Well, that makes sense. Not every year was published. I've listed the years that the directories were published. Women were usually only listed if they were a widow or if they had been employed outside of the home, or again, if they were outside of the home and if they were employed outside of the home, and then look under the business section. Okay. Sometimes the Chicago phone directories included occupations, but not always. Sometimes, but not always. Czech phonetic spellings and ethnic names may have been misunderstood by an English-speaking canvasser. Sometimes the immigrants didn't show up, but keep checking. My Sawicki relatives were here. They married in 1885, and I couldn't find them in the very beginning. But yet I know they had a house because I have the property records from the house from 1889. The Chicago City Directories can be found at the Harold L. Washington Library, the Newberry, the Chicago Historical Society, Richard Daley's Library, and other public libraries and family search history centers. They can also, city directories, the South Suburban Genealogical Society has quite a few of the Chicago city directories in the paper format. And I'm going to tell you right now, they're not in very good shape because people like myself have used them. We touch them. The paper's very thin and frail, and it's so sad when you're turning the page and the page is so old that it just disintegrates right in front of you, and you actually have like crumbs that have information on there that no longer anyone could read. So not all city directories may be on a microfilm or digitized at these locations. So just keep that in mind. They may be, they may not be. So here's one of the directories that I was talking about for Louis Sawicki. I had very few hits on Louis Sawicki, even though I knew he lived on Manistee Avenue. And at this time, it's 8710. It's a house. It's now 8714 Manistee, and the house is still standing. But look at all the Sawickis. I mean, I didn't go up any further, but because I wanted to definitely demonstrate Louis. LAB means he was a laborer, and he worked for the steel mills as a hooker. And I remember, I think I was telling Kathy, I said, oh my God, what do you think a hooker is? And so I found out that a hooker was one of the employees who had a very dangerous job at the steel mills. He had to use these huge instruments, these huge tools to move these huge vats of molten steel from one area to another. Very dangerous. This is liquid steel. Thank goodness he survived and he retired from that position. But he was a laborer, and he did live in a house at 8710 Manistee. And that's the first directory I was ever able to find him listed on after years of searching. Okay, here is the 1882 Chicago City Directory. And as I was talking about the summer name, here's Kate, excuse me, here's Katie, my great-great-grandmother. She was a nurse, and she lived at a house at 248 on Kossuth. Her sister, Julia, was a laundress, and she lived at the same home. Their mother, Elizabeth Summer, is not listed because she was not employed, even though she was the oldest person living in the home, and you would consider her the head of the household. She's not listed. Julia and Kate are. At this time, Charles Ball was not listed anywhere on this 1882 city directory. Here's an 1889 city directory for Chicago. Again, you'll see I highlighted, or maybe it's really not too clear, Ball, Catherine, Mrs., and here it's spelled a little bit different. She's a nurse now, and she is residing at 2358 Wentworth Avenue. But you don't see, okay, this Charles Ball is not Catherine's husband. It would be nice if he was, but he's not. Mead and Ball was a big company that was also owned by a Charles Ball, but this Charles Ball is not, unfortunately, my relative. And nowhere on the 1889 city directory, whether it's under Ball or the business, is Charles listed. Here's the 1898 Chicago City Directory. Again, now Catherine is listed under Ball. Catherine J., her middle name was Julia. Mrs. Catherine J., she's a nurse, and now she's living at 9229 Houston Avenue. She moved around a great deal because I believe she was a private nurse where she worked for people who could afford her services. At this time, she also had a 14-year-old daughter, my great-grandmother, Alma. Again, Charles is not listed either under Ball or under any of the occupations. Many, many city directories include a history of the community. Here's an example of 3. The 1939 city of Buffalo, New York. It has 22 pages of the history of Buffalo, New York. 1905 Valparaiso, Indiana city directory. What are you seeing? This is the schedule for the mail delivery for the area, including the rural delivery as well. And then on the right-hand side, you see the 1936 city of Boston, Massachusetts city directory, the hub of the universe. I would take the time if, for instance, in Valparaiso, trust me, I looked at this quite in detail. I would take the time to research or to read those histories of the community, because your relatives lived there. They could be included in some of those notes. Look at the mail delivery, the carriers, those names, they're listed there. Your relative may have been a mail carrier. They may have been the mayor of a community. They may have been a police officer or a fireman. And so they may or may not be listed under occupation. They may or may not be listed under surname, but they may be listed in the history of the community. So I would certainly take the time to review the history of a community. Usually it's at the beginning of the city directory. And here's another one, early history of a community. As I indicated, many directories and gazetteers included a lengthy history of their towns and cities. They focused on early settlers, finance, transportation, the growth of the community, what buildings were built, who built them, the cost of the project. You might find that information in a county history book as well, but you might be able to get your hands on a city directory a lot easier. What modes of transportation were available? You know, cars weren't around forever. Wagons, trains, horses, carriages, railroads, boats, government officials. Who was the mayor? Who was the sheriff? Who were lawyers? The positions that they held, laws that were passed, and laws that failed. So your ancestor could very well be mentioned in the early history of a community. It's well worth looking into and reviewing. Here's a listing of the fire department from the 1923 Chicago City Directory, and it's on page 156. And this is just part of it. This isn't all of it. But look, it lists the chiefs of the battalions, fire engine companies, hook and ladder companies. This is such great information. Unfortunately, I didn't have any relatives that I know of yet who were firemen, who worked in that occupation at all. But it's important to note, okay, here's the fire department. There's also the police department. As I'll show you a little bit, there's libraries, there's public works. There's all kinds of occupations that could easily be listed, not in the business section, but under other organizations, societies, secret societies. All of this is listed in many of the city directories. The 1863 Baltimore, Maryland City Directory. Surprisingly, these are only pages 10 and 11 out of 493 pages. Again, as I was talking about earlier, it just amazed me that city directories had that many pages list of information that people like you and I could access. Well, first of all, we'd have to be able to read too, which was always a challenge. But look at some constables, cuppers, corset makers, file makers, harbor master, dyers, gliders, brewers, brokers, butter dealers. I mean, this is just such great information on the city of Baltimore and the occupations that you may or may not find your ancestor listed under. And there's almost 500 pages of this information. I think people kind of underestimate the value of a city directory. Here's some advertisements that I thought were pretty cool. My favorite one was the 1902 Grand Junction, where I've been to Grand Junction, Colorado. It talks about the library, and it lists Mrs. Imelda N.J. Librarian. It talks about hospital asylums. Niagara Falls is over on the left, 1939, Buffalo, New York, the school there. The Boyd Cottage. I cater to transients, rate $2 to $2.50 per day. I love the advertisement. Its pleasant, airy rooms, broad verandas, and well-kept table make one of the most desirable home-like places in Miami. Weekly rates on applications. From 1911, Miami-Dade County, Florida City Directory. Chesterton, this is an advertisement from the 1905 Valparaiso City Directory, which I need to really mention that it included, this 1905 City Directory included townships such as Chesterton, Couts, Hebron, Porter, Woodville, McCool. You know, when you're just looking at Valparaiso, you think, oh, you know, I didn't really have any relatives that lived in Valparaiso, but Valparaiso was like the hot spot for that particular area at that time. So it included 16 other towns and townships in their city directory. So it's worth looking. If you just look at Chesterton and Valparaiso, you think, oh, my relative wouldn't be in there, but it might be worth looking into to see if those townships for your ancestor could be listed in there, okay? The 1911 Miami-Dade city directory that's listed. Unfortunately, when I was looking at it, I noticed something pretty awful. They actually separated the white population names from the colored population names. Like the white population started on page 109 and the color population started at 199. And I thought, oh my God, can you imagine? Thank God something like that would not happen today. At least I pray it wouldn't happen today. Removals. Okay, so sometimes your ancestor may not have been listed, but they were there, or maybe they passed away. You never know. So removals, changes, alterations, corrections, and omissions. And so these are not as easily found. Some city directories I was reviewing did not have a section for this. It is very possible that whoever digitized the city directory simply didn't add this information. So, and that's an important part, is that you're looking at a city directory and it may have 493 pages, but don't expect to necessarily find 493 pages online or digitized or on the microfilm. For whatever reason, mostly probably cost and time, not everything may have been included. Maybe yes, but possibly no. Possibly no. I have yet to find, out of all the city directories that I went through for this presentation, I have yet to find one city directory that had every single page digitized. And trust me, I went through an awful lot of city directories for information for this program. Here's the city of Dallas, Texas, 1888 to 1889. And I noticed the price was $4. So I thought, boy, $4 sounded like a lot of money in 1888. So I just did a little searching to see what $4 in 1888 would be valued at today. It's over $2,600. $2,600. That's how expensive these city directories were. So not a lot of people could afford them. So really, it was the salesmen and the businesses that were going after having their information published in these city directories. And so here's just 1871 Jacksonville, Florida, and 1883 Cheyenne, Wyoming. There's all of these, and these are all that I found easily on different websites that I've used. So where else can you look? Well, you can search Google Books, and I just typed in, when I was doing a Google book search, I went to Google, and then I went to Google Books, and I just typed in Springfield, Illinois city directories. And I came up with this, the 1923 that was listed. And I found it pretty entertaining because one of the pages that was in the book said, to find a name, you must first know how to spell it. If your neighbor is a chronic directory borrower, let us know, and we will endeavor to relieve you of further annoyance. How cute, how cute. And then there's just a page, the city of Springfield, Illinois, under, the letters A. And this was a simple search. All I did was type in Springfield, Illinois, city directory. Lots of them that did come up were for certain professions, but I just kept scrolling down till I found an old one, and then I found 1923. I also searched through the Library of Congress. Now, these are all free websites, okay? The Library of Congress, again, I just typed in city directories, and I came up with hundreds of results. And this one here, Illinois White Pages and Yellow Pages, 1885 through October 1911. There's 595 pages that are available, and this particular date is 1885. Again, Library of Congress is free. Internet Archive, another free website, which Tina Baird is going to be doing a presentation for us, a Zoom program in March on searching Internet Archive and how to create a free account, and some of the vast databases that we can use, because there's lots and lots of databases on Internet Archive that you can research. But this is just one that I pulled up because of, obviously, New Lenox is in Will County, and I wanted something from Will County. And here's 1918. Again, it's Will and Southern Cook counties. So it isn't just New Lenox. It isn't just Joliet. It isn't just Shanahan or Manhattan. It's the area. So it's well worth looking into this. Prairie Farmers Directory from 1918, completely free on Internet Archive. So where have they gone? Where have all the city directories gone? I know at New Lenox, we have a Will County city directory that I can get every 2 years. The county publishes all the important names of people who you may need to contact, and I get copies of those for our patrons there. But when you go to libraries, some of them don't have city directories. Many of them don't have city directories anymore because of their collections. It might be due to a lack of space or low demand. People may get them online. The low paper quality of some of the directories might be an issue. As I talked about earlier, when I went to the South Suburban Genealogical Society, I was so excited to use those city directories that they had. They actually had one I could touch and turn the pages. And I was lucky that I was able to find Ball under those pages, because you would think, well, Ball would be at the beginning, but because of businesses and abbreviations and the history, I was able to find it. But some of them, The papers just tear, they're swept up at the end of the day, and they're gone forever. And then, of course, many are on microfilm, but what happens when the microform reader doesn't work anymore? They're very expensive to repair or replace. Maybe the microfilm itself is in bad condition, and it's too expensive to repair or replace. So they may not all be digitized. Digitization is what most people are having done now instead of just putting things on microfilm. But again, digitization is an expensive endeavor as well. So where to find city directories? As I talked about, archive.org, Heritage Quest, which I want to do a real quick demonstration on right now. Google Books and Google, you can even use Google, Ancestry.com. You can access this database for free inside the New Lenox Public Library and the Oak Lawn Library, the Tinley Park Library, Mokina, Joliet, Orland. It's all free inside the library. Online Historical Directories website, which is Miriam Roberts Midkiff. She created this website, and I found quite a few online city directories there as well. Chicago Ancestors, if you're looking for a Chicago city directory, they have 10 various years ranging from 1866, and that should be 1923, not 1823, my mistake. And the Newberry Library also has a large collection of city directories in print format as well for free. All of these websites that I've listed are free. Keep in mind, Ancestry.com, you have to use the library edition that is free inside the library. You can also get your own personal subscription to Ancestry.com, which would give you access to the city directories as well, but you do pay a fee. So here's two main directory publishing companies, Haynes and Company and Hill Donnelly Information Services. Haynes and Company also does a reverse city directory where you can go by addresses, which is quite nice. We have quite a collection at the Oak Lawn Library on the Haynes. And of course, there's other kinds of directories besides city directories. Of course, we have telephone directories. Wait, do we have those anymore? I haven't had one in quite some time. And the last ones I had were simply yellow pages for businesses in my community. They didn't list people. I mean, I no longer have a landline, so my cell phone isn't published in a directory unless I would provide it to someone. But there's professional directories. We know that you can go online and find doctors and lawyers online. There's civil and military directories, religious directories, which would include the name of the church, the religious denomination, the name of the pastor. We all know about college-related directories, university alumni directories, fraternity, and as I talked about, county regional directories, business directories, which include advertisements for certain businesses.